Comics have seen plenty of iconic characters who preach survival of the fittest and use it as the backbone of their identities. But few have embraced that mentality with a presence as daunting as Apocalypse. He is the towering X-Men villain who transforms mutants into horsemen and treats entire civilizations as evolutionary experiments. But when you look beyond his armor, the character of En Sabah Nur becomes a fascinating and disturbing study. As one of the Earth's earliest known mutants, his evolution, repeated physical transformations, ideological changes, and sheer level of danger he poses to the X-Men are all worth exploring, which is why I bring you today's video. So, take your seats, buckle up, and allow me to welcome you to the Evolutionary Anatomy of Apocalypse. Without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Here we go.
You will do no such thing.
What does it mean that Apocalypse is one of the first mutants? To kick things off, we have to start from square one, right? En Sabah Nur was born roughly 5,000 years ago in the ancient Egyptian settlement of Aqaba. He possessed the mutant X gene from birth, and his mutation was reflected in his unusual physical appearance. He had gray skin, blue markings around his face, and features that frightened people who found him. Because of this, the infant was abandoned in the desert and left to die. However, he was discovered by a nomadic raider named Baal of the Crimson Sands, who recognized the child's determination to survive. Baal adopted him, raised him among his people, and gave him the name En Sabah Nur. In Marvel's story, the name is translated as the First One. Other proposed real-world translations vary, so it's safest to treat the first one as Marvel's intended meaning, rather than a precise historical Egyptian translation. Among Baal's people, En Sabah Nur encountered the philosophy that would shape his entire existence. Only the strong survive. The tribe believed that weakness invited death and that survival itself proved a person's worth. That outlook was understandable in the brutal environment in which they lived, but En Sabah Nur would eventually transform it into a much larger and more dangerous ideology. In 1996, Marvel published a limited series, The Rise of Apocalypse, written by Terry Kavanagh and illustrated by Adam Polina. This remains one of the most important accounts of Apocalypse's early life and is a major influence on the ancient Egypt storyline in X-Men 97 Season 2. In the comics, the time traveler who would become known as Kang the Conqueror arrives in ancient Egypt and takes the identity of Pharaoh Rama-Tut. Rama-Tut possesses advanced technology from the future and already knows that En Sabah Nur is destined to become Apocalypse. He therefore attempts to capture the young mutant and shape him into a servant or heir. Rama-Tut's Grand Vizier Ozymandias and his forces attack the Sandstormers. En Sabah Nur and Baal are trapped underground, where Baal reveals secrets connected to Rama-Tut's advanced technology. Baal eventually dies, leaving En Sabah Nur alone, with the knowledge that ancient technology far beyond the ancient world exists beneath Egypt. Enraged by the destruction of the tribe that raised him, En Sabah Nur swears revenge against Rama-Tut. He enters the pharaoh's city and initially hides his identity. There he becomes attracted to Nefri, Ozymandias' sister. But after she sees his true appearance, she rejects him. That rejection deepens his anger and reinforces his belief that compassion, love, and acceptance are weaknesses. During the conflict that follows, En Sabah Nur's mutant abilities fully emerge. He embraces the name Apocalypse and turns against Rama-Tut and Ozymandias. Rama-Tut eventually abandons Egypt and escapes through time. Apocalypse punishes Ozymandias by transforming him into an immortal stone-like servant who is forced to chronicle his master's history. As the centuries pass, En Sabah Nur discovers that he ages extraordinarily slow and can survive injuries that would kill an ordinary person. He travels across the world, gathers knowledge, and encourages conflict, and repeatedly improves his body through alien and advanced technology. So what does one of the first mutants actually mean? It doesn't mean Apocalypse was literally the first mutant to ever exist. Later, Marvel stories introduced mutants and mutant societies that predated him, including the ancient civilization of Okara and other beings associated with the earliest history of mutant kind. However, Apocalypse is still one of the oldest mutants known to remain alive in the modern era. He predates the X-Men, modern mutant politics, and most recorded mutant history by thousands of years. That age gives him a perspective unlike Xavier, Magneto, or nearly anyone else the X-Men face. As supervising director Jake Castorina explained while discussing X-Men 97, Magneto embraces his mutant identity, while Apocalypse sees himself as something beyond both humanity and mutant kind. That difference is essential. Magneto generally views mutants as a people who deserve protection. Apocalypse sees mutants as a raw evolutionary material and believes only the strongest among them deserve to live. At the end of X-Men 97 Season 1, Professor Xavier, Magneto, Rogue, Beast, and Nightcrawler were displaced to ancient Egypt in 3000 BCE, where they encountered the young En Sabah Nur. Season 2 develops that setup by having those X-Men confront the circumstances surrounding the rise of the future apocalypse. It's a clever way to explore the boy he once was, while reminding viewers of the monster he's destined to become. The frightening part of Apocalypse is not merely that he's old, it's that his influence stretches across millennia.
X-Men.
How is Apocalypse's body built? Mutant physiology plus celestial technology. To understand the nature and evolution of Apocalypse's body, we have to separate it into several layers, because trust me, it's a lot. First and foremost, Apocalypse is a mutant. His central mutant ability is extraordinary control over his own molecular structure. This allows him to alter his body's size, shape, density, strength, durability, and physical configuration. His gray skin and blue facial markings were visible from birth, but many of the abilities associated with his modern form developed or intensified over time. His natural mutation grants him immense strength, durability, stamina, and regenerative ability. However, it's inaccurate to say that every power he possesses comes purely from his original X gene. The second major layer is advanced technology. During his early life, Apocalypse gained access to technology left behind by Rama-Tut. In later centuries, he discovered and bonded with technology connected to the Celestials, the ancient cosmic beings who experimented with life throughout the universe. Marvel's history has given slightly different accounts of precisely when and how he gained full access to the celestial vessel and its systems. One important version says that Apocalypse encountered a celestial ship in Mongolia. During a battle with a time-traveling Cable, Apocalypse became infected with the techno-organic virus, which unexpectedly allowed him to interface with the ship's technology. The Celestials later enhanced Apocalypse and appointed him as a kind of evolutionary caretaker, expecting him to help drive the development of mutant kind. This technology significantly amplified his natural powers. It gave him access to advanced armor, energy systems, genetic engineering, regeneration chambers, teleportation technology, and machinery capable of transforming other beings. But it would be misleading to say that Apocalypse simply merged with one machine and instantly became a god. His modern power set is developed through a combination of his natural mutation, celestial technology, techno-organic infection, repeated physical modifications, energy manipulation, genetic engineering, new host bodies, and thousands of years of knowledge. The third layer is continuous self-modification. Apocalypse can restructure his body for different situations. He can enlarge himself, alter the shape of his limbs, form weapons from his body, increase his density, and survive environments that would normally kill an ordinary human. He has operated underwater, in space, and under extreme physical conditions, although some of these feats also rely on his armor and technology. He can incorporate machinery into his body and use external technology to repair and enhance himself. However, the limits of this ability vary from story to story. It would be too broad to say that he can instantly adapt to absolutely any attack or environment. Powerful opponents have injured him, overwhelmed him, infected him, separated him from his technology, and forced him into long periods of recovery. Apocalypse also relies heavily on regeneration chambers, sometimes called Lazarus chambers, where his body is badly damaged or depleted. These chambers can restore him over long periods, but he's not guaranteed to recover instantly. The most disturbing part of his physical existence is that his consciousness is not always permanently tied to one body. During the 12, Apocalypse attempted to transfer his mind into the body of Nate Gray, aka X-Man, because his current form had become old and unstable. The process failed when Cyclops intervened, temporarily causing Scott and Apocalypse to merge. Other stories have shown Apocalypse transferring his consciousness into new or more durable bodies. That makes him extraordinarily difficult to kill, but it does not make him absolutely undefeatable. His consciousness can be disrupted, his host body can be destroyed, and his regeneration can be prevented or interrupted. The X-Men have defeated him repeatedly. The problem is that defeating Apocalypse and permanently erasing every method by which he can return are two very different things. What are Apocalypse's core powers beyond being big and strong? Apocalypse has an enormous arsenal of powers and abilities, but at the center of them is control over his body's molecular structure. That control allows him to change his physical shape, alter his density, enlarge or reduce his body, stretch his limbs, and form weapons from his flesh and armor. He can increase his strength and durability by making his body larger or denser. He can also repair many injuries through regeneration and molecular restructuring. However, total control over every atom should not be interpreted as limitless reality manipulation. His powers primarily directed toward his own body and the technology connected with it. He cannot casually rearrange all surrounding matter in the way a universal matter manipulator might. His shape changing gives him extraordinary versatility because his opponents cannot always predict which physical configuration he'll use. He may increase his size, create blades or heavy striking weapons from his arms, reinforce his body or interface directly with machinery. Apocalypse can also project powerful energy blasts. The exact source of these attacks varies between stories, but they can involve his own internal energy, absorbed energy, or systems built into his celestial armor and technology. He's used energy attacks to damage buildings, repel groups of heroes, and overpower mutants. He can generate defensive barriers and absorb or redirect certain forms of energy. Still, he cannot automatically absorb every attack sent towards him. Opponents have overwhelmed his shields and harmed him with physical, psychic, magical, and energy-based attacks. Apocalypse is also able to alter and enhance other beings. This is one of his most important abilities. Using advanced science, celestial technology, genetic engineering, psychological conditioning, and power amplification, he can transform mutants into his Horsemen. He's also healed, modified, or empowered mutants outside the Horseman process. One notable example involved the Chamber, whose body had been severely damaged by his own mutant powers. A transfusion involving Apocalypse's blood helped reconstruct Chamber's body, but it also altered his appearance so that he resembled Apocalypse. This demonstrates that Apocalypse's biology and technology can affect other mutants. However, it's not accurate to establish a universal rule that his energy heals only mutants and always kills humans. Apocalypse has empowered ordinary humans on occasion, including Moses Magnum, although he generally considers mutants more valuable subjects for his evolutionary experiments. Apocalypse has also displayed psionic abilities, including telepathy and telekinesis. He can communicate mentally, resist psychic attacks, move objects, levitate himself, and exert mental influence. But the strength and consistency of these powers have varied. It's inaccurate to say that his telepathy is unquestionably equal or superior to Professor Xavier using Cerebro. Xavier is one of Marvel's most specialized and experienced telepaths. Apocalypse can defend himself against telepaths and has displayed significant mental power, but he's not consistently presented as a superior pure telepath. He also doesn't create the Horsemen through simple telepathic mind control alone. The process usually combines physical transformation, technological enhancement, trauma, psychological manipulation, brainwashing, promises of restored power or health, and in some cases the subject's willing participation. Apocalypse can manipulate perceptions and memories through psychic or technological means, but these are secondary tools rather than the single foundation of all his transformations. Finally, there's the question of immortality. Apocalypse is effectively ageless and extraordinarily difficult to kill. He's survived for thousands of years using new bodies, entered regeneration cycles, and returned after apparently fatal defeats. However, immortal does not mean incapable of death. His body can be destroyed. He can be wounded, weakened, poisoned, infected, or killed. What makes him effectively immortal is the combination of his mutation, celestial technology, regeneration chambers, consciousness transfer, and access to replacement bodies. Apocalypse also has been associated with the Externals, a group of effectively immortal mutants. The Externals possess a mystical and psychic connection that can allow them to sense one another's deaths or resurrections. But Apocalypse is not simply guaranteed to return because another External senses him. His survival still depends on the circumstances of the particular story. How does Apocalypse use evolution as a weapon? Survival of the fittest in practice. Let's understand Apocalypse's core philosophy. It's much simpler than you might think. Only the strongest should survive. And Apocalypse places himself at the center of that belief as both judge and executioner. He views conflict, disaster, war, and suffering as tools that force life to evolve. According to some accounts, his encounters with the Celestials convinced him that humanity and mutant kind would eventually be judged by cosmic forces. He came to believe that only a stronger civilization would survive that judgment. That belief is not a scientifically accurate interpretation of evolution. Real evolution does not operate according to a moral law in which the physically strongest individual deserves to survive. Apocalypse uses survival of the fittest as an ideological justification for domination, selective killing, and experimentation. In his worldview, weakness is not merely unfortunate, it's an offense that should be eliminated. Apocalypse therefore starts wars, manipulates civilizations, empowers tyrants, and creates disasters to see who survives. He positions himself as both the catastrophe that destroys the old world and the father of whatever rises from its ruins. That is what separates him from Magneto. Magneto usually believes mutants are the next stage of human evolution and must be protected from extermination. Apocalypse does not automatically believe every mutant deserves protection. A weak mutant is as disposable to him as a weak human. He values strength, adaptability, and victory, not mutant solidarity. This philosophy also brings him into conflict with Mr. Sinister. Sinister studies and manipulates evolution through genetics, but his goals center on experimentation, knowledge, and control. Apocalypse wants conflict to act as the engine of evolution. Phoenix is not normally treated as one of Apocalypse's ideological peers, so it would be misleading to describe them as consistently locked in philosophical disagreement. Writer and editor Bob Harris summarized Apocalypse's appeal by explaining that his philosophy was merciless, but easy to understand and connected with the harsher side of evolutionary themes within the X-Men franchise. The easiest way to understand Apocalypse is to view him as a self-appointed judge. He creates conditions in which only the survivors are allowed to define the future. The Age of Apocalypse timeline shows the ultimate result of that philosophy. Human and mutant lives are reduced to constant warfare, genetic experimentation, slavery, and extermination. His threat, therefore, does not end when he leaves the battlefield. Apocalypse plans across centuries. He shapes religions, bloodlines, scientific discoveries, political movements, and future wars. He's not merely a conqueror, he wants to redesign civilization itself. How does Apocalypse rebuild other mutants? The anatomy of the Horsemen. To discuss Apocalypse rebuilding other mutants, we have to look at the Horsemen. War, famine, pestilence, and death traditionally make up the 4 positions. Apocalypse fills those positions with beings he believes can act as extensions of his philosophy. He uses techno-organic augmentation, celestial technology, genetic alteration, power amplification, brainwashing, and psychological conditioning to transform them into weapons. Consider the Horsemen his external anatomy laboratory. They are where he tests his beliefs about suffering, power, and transformation. But not every Horseman is created through the exact same procedure. Some are forced into the role. Some agree because Apocalypse offers to restore something they lost. Some are emotionally broken and manipulated. Others accepted the transformation because they already share part of his worldview. Angel became Archangel after losing his natural wings and falling into despair. Apocalypse restored his ability to fly by giving him metal wings, capable of launching razor-sharp projectiles, but he also brainwashed him into becoming Death. Gambit willingly approached Apocalypse during the 2006 storyline, beginning around X-Men 182 to 183. Remy believed that becoming a Horseman might allow him to infiltrate Apocalypse's organization and protect the X-Men, but the transformation altered his mind and body more deeply than he expected. Apocalypse made Gambit his Horseman of Death. Sunfire became Famine, Polaris became Pestilence, and Gazer became War. At the end of X-Men 97 Season 1, Apocalypse discovered one of Gambit's burned playing cards among the ruins of Genosha. The scene strongly suggests that he intended to restore or transform Gambit. Season 2 develops the consequences of that setup, drawing from Gambit's comic history as Death. Wolverine's transformation followed a different path. Magneto had previously torn the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton. Years later, Apocalypse captured Wolverine and Sabretooth and forced them to fight for the right to become Death. Wolverine won partly because he feared what Apocalypse would do if Sabretooth received the adamantium. Apocalypse restored the adamantium to Wolverine's skeleton and brainwashed him into serving as Death. It was not simply a peaceful deal in which Logan freely exchanged loyalty for medical treatment. Wolverine's choice was made under extreme coercion, and Apocalypse subsequently stripped away much of his free will. Jubilee and the other X-Men eventually helped Wolverine resist this conditioning. The Horsemen demonstrate one of the most disturbing aspects of Apocalypse's character. He rarely sees other people as complete individuals. To him, they're unfinished organisms that can be broken down and rebuilt for more useful forms. How do time and immortality change Apocalypse's mind? Try living for millennia and tell me you wouldn't experience enormous changes in your psyche. Apocalypse's early life in ancient Egypt evolved abandonment, brutal desert survival, slavery, war, rejection, and the destruction of the tribe that raised him. Those experiences helped create his obsession with strength. He came to view empathy and compassion as vulnerabilities rather than virtues. But saying circumstances simply made him evil removes too much responsibility from it. Many people experience suffering without deciding to impose suffering on everyone else. En Sabah Nur repeatedly chose to turn his trauma into a universal law. His extraordinary lifespan then reinforced that belief. He watched empires rise and fall. He saw civilizations praise peace during one century and commit massacres during the next. To him, history appeared to prove that strength and conflict were the only constants. That perspective made individual human lives seem temporary and insignificant. A person might live for 70 years. Apocalypse could wait in a regeneration chamber for centuries. That difference affects how he thinks about consequences. He can begin a plan in one civilization and complete it many generations later. His immortality also encourages enormous air events. He does not merely believe that his philosophy is correct. He believes thousands of years of survival have proved it. However, later comics complicate this image. The Krakoan era revealed that Apocalypse had once ruled Okara with his wife Genesis and their 4 children, the original Horsemen. When the demonic forces of Ementh invaded, Okara was divided into Krakoa and Arakko. Genesis, the first Horseman, and the mutants of Arakko remained behind to contain the invasion, while Apocalypse stayed on Earth. His obsession with strength was partly an attempt to prepare Earth's mutants for the eventual return of his family and the forces of Amenth. This does not excuse his atrocity, but it reveals that his philosophy developed from more than simple cruelty. It involved grief, abandonment, duty, fear, and the belief that only overwhelming strength could reunite him with the family he had lost. In X-Men 97, the time-displaced X-Men encounter the young En Sabah Nur, while another storyline explores the future shaped by Apocalypse. This allows the series to show different points along his long existence at the same time. The X-Men know what the frightened and persecuted child will become. The question is whether changing his circumstances can change his future, or whether their intervention will help create the enemy they're trying to prevent. That sense of inevitability is one of the most effective things about Apocalypse. He appears not merely as a villain who returns, he appears as a fixed point in mutant history. How does X-Men 97 Season 2 reinterpret his origin? Season 2 of X-Men 97 expands the time travel setup introduced in the first season's finale. Rogue, Nightcrawler, Beast, Professor X, and Magneto encounter En Sabah Nur in ancient Egypt, the mutant destined to become Apocalypse. The animated continuity does not have to reproduce the Rise of Apocalypse panel for panel. Instead, it can combine elements from Apocalypse's ancient origin, Ramatut's reign, the suffering of the Sandstormers, the celestial technology beneath Egypt, Magneto and Xavier's opposing philosophies, and the X-Men's knowledge of the future. The result places the X-Men in an impossible moral situation. They know the young Nur will become one of history's greatest threats, but he's not yet the fully formed Apocalypse they recognize. He is still a persecuted young mutant living under slavery and violence. Magneto naturally sees parallels between Nur's persecution and his own experiences. Both survived attempted extermination. Both were shaped by societies that treated them as less than human. But Magneto's identification with Nur does not mean that they're ideologically identical. Magneto wants to prevent mutant persecution. Nur eventually decides that persecution itself is useful because it eliminates the weak. Xavier represents the possibility that pain does not have to produce tyranny. Magneto represents the danger of dismissing Nur's suffering. And the future Apocalypse represents what happens when that child's trauma becomes a global philosophy. The future storyline draws from the adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, and the history of Clan Ascani. In the comics, Scott and Jean are transported into future bodies and raise Nathan Summers under the names Slim and Red Dayspring. Mother Ascani is eventually revealed as Rachel Summers, Scott and Jean's daughter from another timeline. She prepares Nathan to oppose Apocalypse in the distant future. The animated series adapts these ideas according to its own continuity, giving the conflict a deeply personal connection to the Summers family. Apocalypse is not merely an enemy they have to defeat. He's the force responsible for infecting Nathan, destroying possible futures, and shaping generations of their family. That personal dimension makes him more than a comic-level villain. He becomes a hereditary nightmare. The Evolutionary Anatomy of Apocalypse. When looking back at Apocalypse's character from his early days as En Sabah Nur to the cosmic scale threat he eventually became, you have to connect the different stages of his development. He was born a young mutant with control over his molecular structure. He gained access to technology from Ramatut. He bonded with celestial machinery. He was altered by the techno-organic virus. He repeatedly modified himself, replaced damaged bodies, entered regeneration cycles, and transformed other mutants into extensions of his will. But his most important evolution was ideological. The abandoned child who learned that strength was necessary for survival became a conqueror who decided weakness deserved death. That is the true horror of Apocalypse. He doesn't believe he's destroying the world out of cruelty. He believes he's improving it. He sees wars as tests, death as failed experiments, and survivors as proof that his philosophy works. The Krakoan era added even more complexity by revealing his lost family, his connection to Okara, and his role in preparing Earth's mutants for the threat of Amenth. For a time, he even became an ally of the X-Men and a member of Krakoa's Quiet Council, but cooperation did not erase thousands of years of violence. Apocalypse remains one of the Marvel Universe's most dangerous figures because he combines immense power with absolute ideological certainty. He's not merely big and strong. He's a mutant shapeshifter, genetic engineer, ancient warrior, celestial enhanced survivor, sorcerer, scientist, strategist, and master manipulator. He can be hurt. He can be defeated. He can even be killed. But as long as his technology, followers, replacement bodies, or ideology survive, the possibility of Apocalypse remains. And that's our video for today. I hope you had a great time exploring the evolutionary anatomy of En Sabah Nur, later known as Apocalypse. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and drop a like, share it with your friends, and comment your favorite Apocalypse moments down below. Also, let me know whose evolutionary anatomy you want to see next. If we're going along similar lines in universes, maybe Magneto, Mr. Sinister, or someone completely different you'd like to suggest. I'd love to read what you guys have to say. Finally, please subscribe and ring that notification bell so that when we put up more content, you find out first. Until next time, take care.